Hi, fourth grade. We're going to continue our learning of the French and Indian War. We're going to read a section from our Pennsylvania book called A Strange Name for a War. We now know why it was called the French and Indian War. The English government called it that because they were fighting against the French and the Indians. The war was also referred to by some people as the 7 Years' War. I included a picture of Fort Duquesne, the French fort that was built at the point in Pittsburgh today. Back then it was just woods, but that is what the French fort looked like, Fort Duquesne, in the city of Pittsburgh. So let's go on and read a little bit from our Pennsylvania book. This page is called A Strange Name for a War, and I'll zoom in on this picture here in just a couple of minutes. But let's start reading over here. Now we're only going to read a couple of paragraphs today because we want to add some learning from outside of our book too. So let's start with A Strange Name for a War. Remember, this one small fight, cause, started the war known as the French and Indian War. That's the effect. The cause, the small fight was the cause, the effect was the French and Indian War. Remember, that small fight was between George Washington and his 40 men and the French as they tried to sneak up on them during the night, and the French were defeated. But one man escaped and went back to Fort Duquesne to tell the French what had happened. So that one little battle is what started the French and Indian War. The name for this war sounds as if the French were fighting the Indians. In fact, the English were fighting the French for control of the Ohio River Valley. Then it became a war to drive the French out of North America. It was no longer a battle just for the Ohio River Valley. Now it was a war to get the French out of North America. Both the English and French paid Native American tribes to help them fight. Interesting. We thought maybe the Native Americans willingly chose a side, but they were paid to fight for either the French or the British. We're starting here. Washington hurried back to his camp at Great Meadows. Remember, he had found this great meadow in the middle of Pennsylvania? He knew his troops would be attacked by French soldiers from Fort Duquesne because that man had run back and told them. He ordered a round fort built in the meadow. You can understand why he called it Fort Necessity. It was a necessity. They needed it. They knew they were going to be attacked. They had to hurry up and do something. So he called it Fort Necessity. Several weeks later, 600 French and 100 Native Americans attacked Washington's fort. In an all-day rain, his troops were shot at from all sides, from soldiers on higher ground. Many of Washington's troops were sick, injured, or dead. Washington gave up the battle in defeat. The French allowed Washington and his men to return to Virginia without their weapons. The French now controlled the fur trading in the Ohio River Valley. So poor George, another battle, another defeat. He has to go back to Virginia again and report to his governor that it didn't work. So you can see why it didn't work when you look at Fort Necessity and you see why it was built in a great meadow. We talked about that. Built in a great meadow. And it was a round fort. There's some tents out behind here. This is an image of George and his men practicing, preparing for the battle. But here is this fort, and surrounded all around were trees. And remember, the British believed in fighting. The English believed in fighting just like this, in lines, shoulder to shoulder, marching ahead, fighting a war like that. The French and the Indians loved this. They loved all these trees all around the fort. They could hide, they could attack from all sides, and that's exactly what they did. Okay, they attacked him in an all-day rain, a battle, at a little round fort in a great meadow, in an all-day rain. 600 French and 100 Native Americans. So 700 men against Washington's 40 was not going to be an easy battle for the English. So the French allowed George and his men to return to Virginia, which is really unheard of in battle. But the French had won the battle at Fort Necessity. But they said to George Washington and the men that were left alive, go back to Virginia, leave your weapons here. So George and his men had to return to the governor of Virginia and report back that they had lost the battle. So another defeat for George in 1754. Now, in 1755, the English sent General Braddock. Now, Braddock is a name in Pittsburgh that's well known because of General Braddock himself. So there's Braddock Avenue, and there's a city of Braddock, all based on the name of this famous general from the French and Indian War. So in 1755, the English sent General Braddock with a large army to capture the French Fort Duquesne. Washington traveled with Braddock's army over the rough road his men had made the year before. Braddock's army outnumbered the French force 3-1. In crossing the Monongahela River, the French and Native Americans attacked. General Braddock's army was badly defeated. Again, an English army, 3-1. For every 3 English soldiers, there was only 1 French soldier. General Braddock in charge this time, not George Washington. But George was there. So they made the trek again from Virginia, and their goal was to attack and capture Fort Duquesne. And as they were doing that, they were crossing the Monongahela River, which is still here in Pittsburgh. They crossed that Monongahela River, and the French and Native Americans attacked them. General Braddock's army was badly defeated. How could this happen? Right here. How could this happen? When the English fought, they considered you a coward if you did not fight standing up. The French and their friends hid behind trees. They shot at the English's bright red coats. Washington had 2 horses shot from underneath him. General Braddock was shot in the chest. His army retreated. Braddock died a few days later. His men buried him in the middle of the rough road Washington's men had built earlier. And that's part of Pittsburgh history right here. When you think about it, General Braddock was a very famous English general during the French and Indian War. But the French had attacked them again as they were trying to cross the Monongahela River. George Washington was riding his horse. 2 horses got shot out from underneath him. So maybe the men were aiming for George and missed, but they got his horse, or maybe they were aiming for the horse. But 1 horse got shot out from underneath him. He got on another horse, and it got shot out from underneath him. Luckily, George Washington didn't die in those battles. It was close, though, wasn't it? 2 horses shot out from underneath him. However, General Braddock was shot in the chest. His army had to retreat, and Braddock died a few days later. Remember, they've got to make that long trek now back to Virginia across that crude road that was built by George Washington and his men a year earlier. So somewhere along that road, Braddock had died, and his men buried him in the middle of the rough road Washington's men had built earlier. To this day, no one's exactly sure where General Braddock is buried. They've looked, several historians, archaeologists have looked, trying to find out exactly where General Braddock is buried, but somewhere on that road from the Monongahela River back down to Virginia that Washington had made that year earlier, they had to stop and bury General Braddock. No one knows where that's at. We're going to pick up here tomorrow. So for today, I'm going to give you an assignment to work on. Here's what I want you to do. For the next, 5, 6, 7 days, as we learn more and more about the French and Indian War, part of your assignment for social studies is to create a timeline of the French and Indian War. So, I started one for you so that you can see. Yesterday we read about the first battle between the French and the English as the English tried to sneak up on the French. So, you'll find a document called French and Indian War Timeline in your Assignments tab on Teams. So you'll go to Teams, click on Room 41, go to Assignments, and look for the document called French and Indian War Timeline. Open that up. You can find events from the readings that we do together, just like we did today, Or you can do some research of your own to add events to this timeline. So you're going to be filling this timeline up. Okay, I actually gave you 2 lines to write on because I don't think you can write and get all 10 events on 1 line. So you'll have 2 lines to fill. I started you. That's 1. You need 10 events during the French and Indian War. In other words, you will add another 9 events to the timeline. You can find the events from the reading that we just did or research that you want to do on your own. And then the last event on your timeline should be how the war ended. So the beginning one was that battle in 1754. The end of your timeline over here will be the battle or the surrender or whatever happened to end the French and Indian War. At that point, we'll know who won. Okay? So over the next couple of days, while we're reading more and more about the French and Indian War or watching videos, I want you to keep collecting dates to put on your timeline for the French and Indian War until you have a total of 10 events typed onto your timeline. So again, you'll go to Microsoft Teams, you'll go to you'll go to Assignments, you'll see the French and Indian War timeline. Open that up. Do not send it back to me until you are done with it. Keep it there, keep working on it every day, and when you have 10 events, then you can send it back to me. Okay? All right, so you can go ahead and get started on your timeline today if you want to. If you want to find some videos to watch, some readings to do, there's lots of choices for you to learn more and more about the French and Indian War.